Let's begin slowly, like breath on a window pane that fogs and clears, until the view becomes a soft watercolor of fields, hedges, and low cottages settled under a quiet sky. The night is helpful tonight. It brings a hush over the lane, a gentle stillness to the thatch, and the kind of deep silence in which a low fire can be heard speaking to itself. We are visiting a winter from long ago, when the world moved by candle lengths and the patient turning of seasons, and when people met the cold not with complaint, but with craft, community, and a steady courage practiced every evening like a prayer. In this village of the past, houses crouch kindly against the weather. Their bones are hazel and willow. Their skin is earth made friendly with chopped straw and a little dung to bind it. Wattle and daub, shaped by hand, smoothed by palm, mended every year with care. The walls are more than walls. They are a memory of the meadow, lifted and coaxed into shelter. Look closely, and you'll see the mender's signatures everywhere. A seam of moss pressed into a hairline crack. A tuft of sheep fleece tucked where a February draft once found its way. A patch of old sacking set into a gap and sealed with fresh clay. Nothing is wasted. Everything is invited to help, and everything helps a little. Step through the low door and let your eyes soften to firelight. There is no bright glare here, only amber and ember, a small sun in domestic orbit. The hearth is simple stone, a cradle for coals that have been carried from one day to the next, as faithfully as any treasure. Smoke finds its own way upward through the thatch and quiet openings, and the rafters hold the fragrance of 100 suppers and the comfort of 1,000 evenings. The room widens around the fire and cools toward the edges, as rooms did then. The heart is warm, the margins frosty, and that is perfectly understood by everyone who lives within. The floor is honest earth, pressed firm by the work of many feet and dressed in plaited rush and straw. It is renewed again and again, old layers gently lifted away, new ones spread like a fresh page. Every handful carries the riverbank into the house, the clean scent of reeds, the pale green of dried blades, the hush of marshland tamed into softness. Children learn to kneel here with thread and needle, or to pluck a tune on a single-string toy, or to trace with a fingertip the wavering pattern of chaff in a shaft of light. Dogs choose the warmest patches and fold themselves neatly. Chickens roost above on a beam, small bundles of feathered sleep. In the byre behind a thin plank wall, a cow shifts contentedly, lending her slow warmth to the air, as if the house itself is breathing more easily because she is near. Clothing is a gentle architecture built each morning and unbuilt each night. A linen shirt, worn soft and familiar. A tunic of wool whose long fibers remember the field and the flock. Another tunic, if the wind is plain-spoken that day. Leg wraps are crossed and tied. A cloak finds its notch upon the shoulders. A cap gathers the heat that would otherwise wander away. Gloves are patched and repatched, and if they are not pretty, they are nonetheless perfect, for they keep hands willing. Washing waits for warm weather. In winter, the cloth keeps the memory of work and smoke, and that faint sheen, more practical than any polish, helps it turn the wind. No one minds. Everyone understands. Warmth always speaks with the quietest voice. Listen to the language of tools. The poker rings softly against the hearthstone. A wooden spoon, long-handled and smooth as river pebbles, gives one slow circuit to the pot. The trivet accepts a kettle with a small, tidy clink. There is a ladle with a worn spot where the lip has rubbed 1,000 times against a bowl. Nearby, a basket keeps round stones that have learned the pleasure of fire. set in the embers by evening, wrapped in cloth at bedtime, and slipped beneath blankets to release their careful warmth by degrees. A domestic star, folded into linen. Supper is unhurried and satisfying, grain thickened into comfort, roots with their garden sweetness intact, parsnip, onion, carrot, turnip, each a soft coin of sunlight kept safe beneath the soil until now. Perhaps a sliver of salted meat makes the broth think of summer fields. Perhaps it is a meatless night, and the spoon brings steam and hunger together with perfect contentment. Bread is dense and faithful, a slice at a time, its crust singing faintly as it is torn. A cup of small beer or warmed watery ale carries its mellow note. No one counts courses. The body is full enough, the spirit more so. After eating, the room leans into story and small tasks. A strap is mended. A basket lip is renewed with fresh withy. A child's stocking is darned with soft wool teased from a fraying cuff and made useful once more. The old speak of winters remembered not for their hardship, which is understood and needs no embroidery, but for the kindnesses that visited them. The day a neighbor's boy brought a bundle of wood just as the store ran low. The afternoon when a hen resumed laying, and an egg became not just food, but a sign that light was slowly walking back across the calendar. The time the thaw came early, and the lane smelled of wet earth and hope. The fire listens. The thick walls listen. Even the resting tools seem to listen, content that they have done their day's duty and may tuck themselves into shadow. When it is nearly time for sleep, the oldest craft of all is practiced. Banking the fire. A small crater is hollowed in the ash, with the care one gives to a cradle. A glowing coal is nudged into the center, tucked as gently as a child. Ash is drawn over it, not too tight, not too loose. A blanket with room to breathe. There is no rush. The hand is sure, the movement's an heirloom. Morning will find this ember still alive, orange at its heart, ready to wake at the faintest encouragement. This is the nightly covenant with warmth. We keep you. You keep us. Beds are hospitable without being grand. A frame holds a tick of straw that crackles softly when someone settles in. If the straw is new, it smells like a stored summer. If it is older, it smells like the home itself. Wool and smoke and the faint sweetness of dried rush. Over the sleeper, the weight of blankets is a language all its own. A coarse wool, another, perhaps a skin with the fur turned inward on the bitterest nights. The body rests not alone, but among bodies, because warmth is best when it is shared. Children nest in the middle where heat gathers naturally. Elders take the favored edge close to the hearth's last reach. Parents turn toward both at once. The dog finds the foot and claims it, and the house, feeling everyone breathe, seems to sigh with satisfaction. And should someone wake, as people often did in the long hours between first and second sleep, the house is ready to keep them company. There is a small lamp if it must be lit. There is a mug warming on a brick near the embers, a mouthful of broth or a sip of ale threaded with spice. There are quiet tasks that are friendly to lamplight. Plucking a chicken, sorting dry beans with a slow, meditative rhythm, setting herbs into little twists of paper for an upcoming cough or ache. Then, when the mind has walked its gentle circle, back to bed, back to the pooled warmth, back to the kind second chapter of rest. Breath is a craft in winter, as much as weaving or joinery. People learn to send it through the nose, to let it pass beneath a fold of cloak or a soft strip of cloth, to give the cold air a moment to warm before it travels further in. No one hurries their breathing. It is unspooled slowly, like thread from a distaff, quiet and steady. In the morning, the cloth laid across the mouth may be faintly damp, a simple proof that life kept patient watch. The house has a dozen small answers to drafts, each learned from someone older who learned it from someone older still. If the wind finds a seam at the corner post, a twist of dry grass will answer it. If a window plank trembles, a dab of sheep grease calms it. If the thatch has settled where snow pressed it in last week's weather, a new bundle of reeds is combed into place and pinned quietly with hazel pegs. The aim is not the perfection of a sealed box. It is the friendly management of air and heat, a cordial agreement between outdoors and in. Food, too, has its winter wisdom. There is a crock of barley soaking for tomorrow's porridge, a string of onions shining like small moons against the wall, a hoop of cheese aging toward its richer promise, a jar of pickled cabbage bright with the memory of gardens, a pot of beans that will welcome a bone when one is available, and be perfectly content without when it is not. The haybox, the great wooden chest thick with insulating straw, keeps a pot warm from afternoon into evening and from evening into morning. The slow, secret heat of stored sun coaxed from dry stalks to help through a dark stretch. Stones from the fire sit together in the haybox too, releasing a steady comfort, ready to be carried to bed, wrapped in cloth or slipped near boots to lift the chill from leather. The village itself breathes in these rhythms. Someone's smoke is thin today? A neighbor notices and stops by in the gentle way that people learn when they live close and care deeply. A child carries a jar of embers to the widow at the lane's end. He brings back carefully a biscuit flavored with last summer's fennel. The shepherd, with winter's quiet in his stride, leaves a tuft of wool for a new mother whose baby fusses at night. It will make a softer pillow stuffing. The miller sets aside the last cup of flour from the day's grist, just enough to tip a household from almost to enough. None of this asks to be praised. It only asks to be continued. Faith keeps winter company without drama. Blessings live in the ordinary. Someone draws a small cross in flour on a loaf before it meets the griddle stone, as much habit as holiness. A sprig of rosemary from the summer garden dries above the hearth, not for show, but because its scent is a kind companion. On a shelf, a candle blessed on a feast day waits without impatience. Some nights it is lit. Some nights the embers are ample and vigil enough. Saints are remembered by the good they are asked to lend. A clear chest, steady breath, safe roofs, and patience. Prayers are not bargaining chips. They are a kind of breathing too. On very cold nights, more bodies join the indoor company. A calf will stand drowsing in the byre, the velvet of its nose fragrant with milk and hay. A goat will make a thoughtful seat of a bundle of spare thatch. Hens, as always, approve of rafters. Cats patrol the line where rushes meet wall, considering the tiny kingdom under the floorboards and keeping it politely out of sight. There is a little jumble at bedtime as everyone finds their place, and then the puzzle clicks gently into comfort. Warmth is made in layers, of wool, of straw, of breath, of companionship. Clothing acquires a winter sheen, not a gloss of vanity, but a luster of use. The weave tightens under hand and smoke. Hems and cuffs learn to be stout. Grease from the sheep curls into the fibers and becomes weather's polite boundary. Gloves grow a little stiff and then soften again when warmed by work. Cloaks hang near the hearth, one edge turned toward heat, one edge turned toward the room so that someone passing can find a shoulder already that much kinder when they pull it on. Hats keep their shape the way a nest keeps the memory of the bird that formed it, by intention, by patience. There are, of course, nights when the cold presses with more enthusiasm than anyone would choose. Even then, the answers are unhurried. A second stone is warmed and carried to the foot of the bed. A shawl is moved from peg to shoulders. Someone sleeps by turns with someone who needs more warmth, trading places quietly as the hours pass, so no one spends too long at the edge of comfort. If a cough lingers, the kettle carries a spoon of honey and a whisper of time into a breath of steam that rests in the chest like a friendly hand. Nothing is dramatic. Everything is attentive. Winter keeps a small museum of sound. The crisp, neat snap of a log when it surrenders to the fire's persuasion. The hush of snow rolling from the thatch in a light drift, followed by a deeper silence as the roof sits taller again. The softened cluck of a hen readjusting her dream. The faint, regular chime of a wooden bucket's iron hoop as it is set down on the hearthstone. The contented pressure of a cow's hoof into straw. Each noise is a bead on the thread of night. Count them, and you count the ways the house says, "We are fine." Community watchfulness is easy here because it is shared, and shared watchfulness never feels heavy. A boy walking home from the mill in the last light will glance at every chimney without deciding to do it, then report at supper whose smoke was robust and whose was modest. In the morning, a girl sent to fetch water will notice the tracks in the snow and come back with a tidy census. The tinker has passed. Fox visited the hedge, and someone's dog went joyfully from door to door with news. Old neighbors, the ones who have taught 3 generations to listen to the weather, tilt their heads when the wind changes pitch and know whether wood should be stacked on the leeward side of a shed or whether it is a good day to beat rugs under the clean cold. Wisdom is everywhere, worn soft like linen. Even the cold's lessons arrive kindly. Deep snow pauses the wheel and invites mending. Ice on the water barrel teaches the mild art of tapping a circle with the back of a spoon instead of cracking the whole top into shards. A long twilight gives enough time to lay out tools for morning in the order the day will need them. Fat saved from autumn's work remembers to turn old cloth into lamps that burn cleanly. Soot laid on a rafter serves as calendar and caution both. Time to swipe it away with the rush broom. Time to admire the sudden brightness of wood made new by a few strokes. Every house keeps a little cabinet of winter flavor. Dried apples folded like small moons in a muslin bag. Juniper for stewing meat when meat is to be stewed, and for scenting the room when it is not. A heel of cheese wrapped like a secret. A crock of pickled beets that paint the bowl with blush. A handful of hazelnuts that crack with a satisfying thoughtfulness. There is pleasure in saving too. 2 carrots braided by their tops tuck into a corner as prettily as a ribbon. A pot of honey glows with trapped July. The salt bin is a quiet pillar of trust. The village speaks a grammar of helping that never needs to be taught outright. A cart's wheel complains. 3 men arrive at different hours with 3 different solutions, all of which work together. The new mother's porch is sprinkled with gifts over a week. Rushes for the floor, milk still warm in a stoppered bottle, a clean board to lay near the fire for the baby's first steps when the baby is ready for steps months hence. An old widower finds his firewood smaller than he remembers, and afterward notices that someone has been shortening his logs to suit his axe without ever knocking on his door to be thanked. Winter reveals this grammar the way frost reveals the shape of a leaf, by tracing what was always there. Some evenings, a small, companionable solemnity drifts across the room. Not sadness, just a deep quiet. It often comes after the second ladle of stew, when hands are warm and bellies are satisfied, when all the small scurries of the day have found their nest, and the clock of chores has slipped its weight for the night. In that quiet, people remember the ones who taught them to do these things. the proper way to lift the lid of a pot, the best place to hang a cloak to dry without stealing the fire's draft, the trick of wringing a cloth twice with a twist in the middle so it does not drip when it is carried across the room, the patience to let a kettle come back to a hum instead of chasing it with too much wood. Gratitude moves across faces like embers brightening in a stir of air, and if someone speaks of loss, they do so in a tone that stirs warmth rather than chills. A name is said, a story is told, and it is a story about a good loaf or a good laugh, or about the time a person, remembered with love, taught an inexperienced hand how to set a pot away from the fire's fierce center, so soup need not be watched every moment. Winter does not deny the fact that some chairs are empty. It sets another log, draws another stool nearer the heat, and welcomes quiet company. Memory here is not sharp. It is soft and lined with wool. Sleep arrives the way snow falls on a hedge, gathering without haste, rounding edges, making a shared thing of what were once separate shapes. The house lowers its long lashes. The fire closes one eye and leaves the other open behind ash, just enough to keep its promise. One by one, breaths lengthen. Even the clock of the heart seems to keep time with the slow drip of melt from the eaves. One drop every long while, a metronome for rest. Outside, the lane gathers footprints and keeps them safe until morning. The hedge holds the pale silences between fence posts. The moon, if it bothers to visit, lays a narrow road of silver along the frozen ditch, as if inviting anyone who wakes in the night to walk it with their eyes and return with a lighter mind. The wind is polite tonight. It moves high in the trees and leaves the eaves untroubled. Before you close your own eyes, take a last slow look around this room the way the people who live here do every night. See what is in its place. The kettle tilted to keep its lip easy for morning. The cup turned upside down to keep dust from its rim. The poker leaning where the hand will find it without searching. The little basket with stones that have earned their sleep. The shoes set with their toes toward the fire, so their leather will remember to be friendly when dawn asks for footsteps. Now let yourself be held by the same plain miracles that hold this house together. Ember, ash, straw, wool, hands, habit, neighborliness, patience. Let the old clock of winter's work tick for other people while you rest. There is enough wood for the night. There is enough bread for the morning. There is enough warmth banked, both in the hearth and in the company you are keeping, to carry you softly across the dark. When dawn comes, with its gray bowl of light, with its quiet cloud of breath, with a rooster trying his best and a kettle learning its morning hum, you will wake into a day that knows you and asks only simple things. For now, turn gently, breathe through your nose, and drift. The village is sleeping, the fire is breathing, the house is at peace, and so are you. Let us remain with winter a little longer. The season has more to say, and it prefers to speak in a low voice. The hush of falling snow, the fist-soft thud of a log settling in the grate, the nearly inaudible purr of a kettle learning to steam. Nothing hurries here. The village keeps its measured pace, and the night, patient as an old teacher, invites us to sit by the hearth and learn. Begin again with morning, the pale kind that arrives almost sideways through the world, glancing off frost-sugared hedges and making a gray shine of the lane. A woven curtain is lifted from the doorway peg, a little fog of breath blooms, and a hand, still warm from the bed, reaches for the latch. Air comes in, honest and cold. There is no argument with it, only greeting. The day has come with its small ledger of tasks, and every entry is friendly when met at the right hour. The ember kept its promise. Someone, perhaps the one who sleeps lightest, kneels at the hearth and brushes away ash with the same respect a person uses when waking a child. Beneath the soft drift, the coal lies, orange at its core, a small heart that survived the night. A twist of straw, 2 sticks in a shy teepee, a curl of birch bark, the poker's gentle breath, the ember stirs to a glow, then a lick, then a steady, companionable flame. The room is not changed much, and yet everything is different. Heat resumes its conversation with air. Light answers. The day can begin. Before the sun is brave enough to show itself fully, there is the business of animals. Boots set near the fire with their toes toward warmth all night, except feet without complaint. A cloak comes down from its peg with the remembered fold over the far shoulder. The door opens and closes quickly, and the buyer gives its small welcome. Hay, the buttery breath of a cow, the faint sweetness of stored apples nearby. Hands move as if they were taught yesterday. Grain into a shallow wooden pan for the hens. Clean water lifted and poured with a respectful tilt so ice cannot surprise it. A gentle palm along a broad flank to say good morning in the language animals understand best. Steam rises from backs and breath. The world is rendered into soft versions of itself, fuzzed by cold, simplified by snow. Breakfast is not a spectacle, it is a kindness. Yesterday's porridge, saved in the haybox where warmth lingers like a secret, returns to the fire for the briefest moment and becomes willing again. A spoon of honey, if the store permits. A pinch of salt always. A handful of dried berries that bloom into themselves when they meet heat and liquid. Bread that slept beneath a cloth wakes to find itself kissed on one side by the griddlestone. Cups are set out, warming their hands around small beer or watered ale. A little milk is warmed for the youngest. In this light, faces look particularly dear. The way lids weigh on eyes, the way hair remembers the pillow, the way laughter seems to rise like steam from bowls. The day divides itself in the kind old-fashioned way, not by bells or clocks, but by what tasks ask for what light. Morning is for the long work of wood and water, of sweeping and shaking, of feeding fire and family in equal measure. Later comes the close work of hand and lap, mending socks, plucking a bird, spinning a skein brought in from the cold and set near enough to learn the room's warmth before fingers invite it onto the distaff. In the narrow seam of daylight, the lane grows a quiet traffic of errands. One neighbor bearing a wrapped loaf to another. A child trudging with a slate board to the widow who trades letters for eggs. The shepherd's girl leading a slow, good-natured ewe to look at a hoof that is not troubling, but might be if the weather changes again. Winter makes everyone a little more tender with time. Drafts are tended in daylight the way wounds are tended in summer, with gentle attention and nothing wasted. The place where 2 timbers meet and think about changing their minds is convinced to stay true with an extra wedge and a bead of clay. A mouseway under the threshold is politely closed with pebbles and a soft plug of wool that once was part of a mitten, then part of a blanket, and now is part of the house itself. Where the thatch was scolded by last week's wind, a ladder grumbles up the outside wall, and hands, sure on the round rungs, take a reed bundle in their crook and comb the roof back into its good habits. Up close, the thatch smells like last July, sun-warmed, grassy, kind. Someone below steadies the ladder without being asked. This is how winter builds its scaffold of safety. Palm to rung, word to weather, neighbor to neighbor, breathing remains a craft, shared between elders and children as carefully as recipes and riddles are shared. In through the nose, says the grandmother, showing with a small flare of nostrils, and out as though you were warming your hands. Scarves are not only for throats, but for the little cave they can make at the mouth, a chamber where air can be introduced to warmth before it travels inward. Children learn to keep giggles soft, so breath does not gallop. They learn to hum while they wrap their own feet in cloth for the first time, because a humming child does not mind a scratchy wool so much. They learn to sit in the sun's small square when it lands on the floorboards, because that square is the best heater of all, and a person ought to thank heat by meeting it halfway. Meat is used with priestly restraint and gratitude. Broths start bones on a long pilgrimage from hardness to goodness, and peels that would be thrown to pigs in autumn are invited to bring their sweetness to the pot in January. Beans, like good neighbors, are more than they appear. They hold warmth as if it were a story they are telling to themselves, and only at the spoon's arrival do they share it with the eater. A cabbage is an old friend in winter. It gives and gives. An onion is a flame without fire. A pot left to think slowly in the haybox becomes more generous while no one watches. And then there is the haybox itself, winter's treasure chest, lined with straw, its sides thick with the summer that once stood in fields. It keeps soups at a friendly simmer in a world that is not simmering at all. A pot that has met the fire for a few minutes and found its voice is carried, careful and proud, to the chest and lowered into its nest. The lid closes with the hush of a lullaby. Hours later, when the lid lifts, the smell that greets the air is the fragrance of patience rewarded. People in the house sometimes open the haybox for no reason, only to smile and close it again, as if checking on a sleeping child. Children are not idle in this season. They are apprentices to it. A boy learns to read snow the way a sailor reads clouds, wide-grained for sledging, powder for sweeping, crusted for careful steps. A girl learns to read silence. Whether it is the silence of a watchful fox beyond the hedge, or the silence of a kettle that requires a pinch more wood, all learn to listen for the language of their own house, which has many dialects. The tick that means the beam is settling contentedly. The creak that means the latch wants oil. The small scuttle that means a cat's work is nearly done, and supper can be promised to it with justice. The church stands in winter like a book left open in the middle, spine to the sky, pages fluttering their nighttime prayers into the fields. Not every day brings a chorus. Not every day even brings a visit. But the shape of the church's roof is a comfort object at distance, a reminder that the village has a single breath when it needs one. A blessed candle waits in many homes for the nights when someone's cough drills deeper than it should, or when old worry visits with a heavier step. The candle does not ask to be used often. It only asks to be believed in. And so people let it rest most nights, trusting that belief is itself a kind of heat. On the calendar's quiet pages, winter keeps feast days that are less about splendor than about rhythm. The day when the first light seems a shade brighter at breakfast is noted with a special piece of bread, sugared if sugar can be spared, smiled at if it cannot. A saint who is remembered for healing throats is thanked not only with prayer, but with a tray of sliced onions drying near the fire to become the syrup that helps both children and adults in the coming weeks. A feast for candles is observed not with display, but with the checking of wicks, the trimming of ends, the smoothing of wax with a warm palm, so that the month ahead is less likely to surprise anyone with a sputter at an unhelpful hour. No one would call winter generous, and yet its gifts are exact. It fetches people close together who in other seasons might wander farther. It makes of kitchens, classrooms for kindness, and of doorways, confessionals for small needs spoken without embarrassment. It asks the body to learn the grammar of care and answers the lesson with a kind of strength that never brags. It is the season in which the village chooses what it will be when green returns. More patient, more skillful, more bound to one another by 1,000 good, plain ties. There is a craft of sleeping as exquisite as any carving. Beds are arranged like maps of the room's warmth. Someone sleeps near the wall where cold touches first, and that someone is always strong and always willing. Not a hero, merely the right person for that night. The outermost sleepers serve as a living windbreak, and in toward the middle the warmth deepens until the children are held in the pool of it, like stones warmed by a midday sun. In houses where straw is set straight onto the floor, the edges are banked higher than the center, making a hollow that remembers bodies and keeps rolling at bay. A heated stone travels the foot of the bed from one pair of feet to another, as if it has its own small circulation, and each grateful foot sends it on with a nudge and a drowsy blessing. Fire tending is a rota. No one writes it down, and no one forgets it. A daughter rises on Tuesdays to lift the ash from the coal and place the first twig. A father wakes on Thursdays to listen for the house's thin places when the wind runs a new pattern over the roof. A grandmother wakes when she wakes. This is her privilege. And in the times when she sits by the fire alone, the room looks like a place from a story. The benched shadows lean in. The kettle keeps a cat's purr, and she speaks to the embers as if they were old schoolmates, which of course they are. There are winter games that are as soft as the season is stern. A ring of nutshells is set on the table. Each holds a crumb, and a child breathes across them like a winter breeze to see which ones sail, which ones root. A riddle is told about a thing that gets wetter the more it dries. A small person with bright eyes, eager and confident, announces "towel" and receives a piece of dried apple for wisdom well spent. A hand shadow flickers against the wall, then becomes a bird, then a rabbit, then a castle with a waving banner. No one ever grows too old for this display. Dice made from carved bone tick in a cup and spill like little moons, though there is never much to wager with besides pride and laughter. Tools winter in their own way. Scythes rest like sleeping fish under the eaves. Plows lean companionably against the shed, each bolt and buckle lightly greased with tallow before the frost set in. Flails, which knew autumn's music, hang quiet as dried herbs. The spinning wheel, by contrast, is busiest now. It answers all silences with the calm of its whir and spin. A drop spindle sits on the bench like a kind of punctuation, a comma perhaps, between chores. When hands are restless but feet need to stay put, the spindle descends and rises, and twist travels through wool and thread happens, and the house praises the small industry without words. There is a courteous economy of light. Curtains are drawn at dusk as one draws a shawl around a friend's shoulders, gently, with a little pat at the end. Candles are trimmed with thought. Wicks are saved from candles that have burned out, not because there is a perfect use for them, but because a perfect use will someday ask for them and be glad they were kept. Someone in each house is the candle keeper by nature, if not by appointment. That person knows which stub can be set into which holder and made to shine as if it were new again. They are also the one who remembers the whiter, saltier wax that ought to be set aside for the days when a child's fever is expected to break, and a cool light is kinder than a hot one. Gatherings in winter are less frequent and somehow deeper. When people do walk across the night to another door, they arrive with cheeks polished by cold and eyes that have done a long look at the stars on the way. Boots are left just inside to honor the floor. A coat is lifted and given a place near the warmth, not too near. And the host's hands perform that small, careful ballet everyone knows. Making space, offering a stool, reaching for a cup. Conversation arrives sideways and meanders, pleased to be unimportant for once. A story becomes a quilt built from scraps of memory, and as each piece is added, it becomes impossibly warmer. If music comes, it comes quietly. A reed pipe turns a handful of notes over like pebbles in a pocket until the tune remembers itself. A fiddle, thin, honest, with a midwinter tone, finds a slow air that knows how to sit by the fire. Voices hum. Feet do not stamp. That is for harvest time. Instead, toes keep time in shoes, as if they were reminding the floor of the meaning of steady. It is not performance, but presence. Music as a way of agreeing together that the evening is a good one, and that the house is doing a fine job of being a house. Work that summer forgot to ask for is welcome now. A handle is re-riveted to a bucket. A latch is encouraged to lie down straight. A child's name is stitched on the inside hem of a cloak in a crooked, lovable script that will be recognized with a smile years from now, when the cloak has become a cousin's or a neighbor's, and maybe then a blanket for a whelping dog. Repairs are patience made visible. Mending is a vote cast in favor of tomorrow. Evening hunger is gentled rather than chased. A pot of peas pudding shares itself with a spoon and does not seem to mind sharing again an hour later with the same spoon. A dish of stewed apples sits on the table and makes the air taste faintly of orchards. Someone breaks a little cheese and sets it on a board with the reverence old altars expect. It is not a feast, but perhaps it is better than a feast. It asks nothing of the stomach but gratitude and answers with a warmth that spreads beneath the breastbone and keeps going until it has met the place where the day's last worry is stored. There, it rests and eases. Messages travel in winter like migrating birds, short flights, trustworthy landings. A word passed to a neighbor at the well reaches the far edge of the village by the hour when candles are being pinched. Old Tom's chimney is sulking. The midwife went by at dusk with a basket. Quioi, a fox has been admired near the north hedge. Hens may wish to withdraw their invitations. News is not a drumbeat. It is a heartbeat. Soft, regular, enough to keep life's circulation steady and warm. No one is left alone with a problem if a door can be reached. Even when weather tries to be a wall, it often manages to be a window instead, and a hand appears through it with a loaf or a small wrapped coal or a folded joke. When the cold grows bold and tests the door with the heel of its hand, the house answers not with fear, but with the graceful addition of one more layer wherever one more layer will do the most good. A blanket goes over the curtain. A plank leans against the hinge side of the door for a night or two. Straw is added to the bed, the fresh squeak of it a promise that bones will be pleased. The answer to weather is never argument. It is always arrangement. The night sky in winter has a listening quality. Stand just beyond the threshold, and it feels as if the stars have paused in their long walking to hear you speak, or perhaps to offer a word of their own. People do step out now and then, not to leave the warmth, but to repay it with admiration. Look at that, someone says, low, not wanting to wake the children, nor the neighbor who surely is meeting the night with equal reverence on his own step. Look, breath folds on the air and drifts upward with the gaze, both vanishing at the same unhurried pace. A person goes back inside different in the smallest, best way. There is a way that winter blesses hands. It makes them chapped, yes, and asks for salve. but it also teaches them to be certain. Certain of the balance of a log, of the weight of a pail, of the right pinch of salt, of the right softness in the heel of a loaf, of the exact moment when a sock's heel is strong again and not merely present. A winter hand is not elegant, but it is eloquent. It can tell a story just by resting on a tabletop, by folding over another hand, by being placed palm down on a child's crown for a moment that says without words, "You belong to warmth." There are small reliquaries everywhere in a winter house. In the shelf's corner, a pear that never quite ripened, kept because it looks like a bell. In the window's dim, a feather from a hawk that traveled the lane in autumn, kept because it remembers flight. In a bowl, a spool salvaged from a broken shuttle, kept because it still prefers to be useful and will find a way. On a peg, a hat worn thin over the years until it is almost a prayer, kept because prayers do not wear out but wear in. These things do no practical work. Their work is to make the mind glad in the gray months, and they accomplish it perfectly. Language itself tightens in winter, the way fences are checked and knots retied. People speak fewer words and choose them well. Compliments are shaped like bread, plain, nourishing, shareable. Apologies are warm and swift and small enough to hold in one hand. Gratitudes multiply like stars if you tilt your head the right way. Even jokes trim themselves down and become better for the trimming. Laughter takes less room and lasts longer, tucked into pockets like handstones to be turned and warmed later. Night returns as it always does, not falling but gathering, and the house, having done an honest day's share of keeping people alive and cheerful, yields its corners back to shadow. Candles step forward and then step back again as they are pinched with a wet fingertip. A thin thread of smoke draws a line through the air, straight and true, then disappears into the ceiling's quiet archive. The fire is fed its last small meal and reminded gently that both it and the people who love it will visit again at dawn. Ash is drawn forward with a careful hand. The ember is tucked. The little lid of iron over the kettle is placed so it will not startle in the night. The door is lifted, set, lifted again, set again. A ritual as soft and correct as a blessing. And again, the choreography of sleep assembles itself without fuss. Places are found, blankets negotiated, pillows pressed a little into new shapes where they remember old heads and welcome them home. A stone is rescued from its twined cloth and passed to a pair of feet already smiling in anticipation. A last sip is taken. A last glance is given to the peg that keeps a coat exactly where a person's memory says it will be in the morning. Cats curl into commas, dogs into question marks, humans into the shape of answers. Outside, the lane holds the dark in a kind of thoughtful embrace. Inside, the dark is made gentle by the breath it contains. If wakefulness comes, it is not an enemy. It is a hand on the shoulder. Someone rises and writes nothing down and yet makes a list. Wood stacked by the door. A word to the neighbor about the fox. The cheese moved to a cooler corner. The oat bin smilingly sufficient. The child's cough lighter than last night. The promise of sun on the sill if the sky keeps its lighter edge. The person returns to bed and does not count sheep. They inventory blessings and fall asleep somewhere around the middle of the list. Dawn is never loud in winter. It does not slam the door. It draws a new pail along the horizon and waits. When eyes open, they open into a room that knows them. Breath makes a fog and then a smile. Hands find slippers. Someone laughs quietly for no reason but being alive. The ember inside the ash opens its small orange eye. A day begins that will look, at a distance, like yesterday. but up close will be stitched with new, kind differences. A new story, a new loaf, a new track of fox across the lane, a new patch of sunlight traveling a slightly different path across the floorboards. It is enough. And so we go on, winter and we, in the company of modest marvels. If tomorrow asks for more layers, we will give them. If tomorrow offers a milder wind, we will open the door a little wider. If tomorrow looks exactly like today, we will find, in the exactness, a place to rest and be warmed. For now, ease the mind into the soft, slow curve of sleep, while the snow, unbothered by any need to hurry, writes its careful script along the hedges. The house keeps its ember, the village keeps its watch, your breath keeps its calm. Sleep and let the quiet intelligence of winter keep you. Let us linger in winter's quiet house, where the day starts not with a clatter, but with a soft rearranging of light. Morning does not break here so much as it unfolds, like linen eased from a chest. Gray first, then a tender blue, then the faintest gold touch on the ridge beyond the frozen lane. In that shy glow, the village remembers itself. Low cottages with their backs to the wind, hedges traced with frost, a river holding its breath beneath a thin glass skin. The world is patient, and so are the people who wake within it. The ember kept its word. A hand, steady, sure, warm from the coverlet, sweeps ash aside as if parting hair from a child's brow. There it is, the small, enduring heart of last night's fire, a dull orange that brightens when it feels the attention. A twist of straw, a curl of birch bark, two slim sticks with their ends touching like friends at a doorway. Then breath, the kind of breath winter teaches. Slow, coaxing, confident. Flame blooms like a yawn, unthreatening, agreeable, a little shy. The room thanks it without speaking. A kettle sits in its proper place, the place it has known for years, and within minutes it hums the small, contented song that never tries to be louder than the house needs. Cups come forward, each with its history. The one chipped on a harvest day, another with a faint ring of glaze like a moon at the brim, a third older than most of the hands that hold it. Sometimes a little milk warms in a second pot, not to a boil. Why hurry warmth? But just to the point where its cool edge yields and it breathes a little cloud when poured. A heel of bread returns to the griddle stone to find its courage again. A pat of last summer's butter, kept cool in a crock, remembers flowers when it melts. Before the sun is wholly sure of itself, boots set by the hearth with their toes toward the heat all night, accept feet without complaint. The byre door answers the latch with a trusted sound, and the animals offer their morning in words the ears understand through the body. The slow shuffling of a cow who has been warm all night and knows that breakfast travels in the pockets of the familiar human. The mumbled curiosity of a goat. The soft bark of a dog who has already made a quick circuit of the yard to be certain the night left everything where it should be. Hay is given, water refreshed. The manger tidied the way one tidies a bed, because animals sleep and wake too, and it is good to honor that. The lane is a ledger. Overnight, a fox has signed his name with tidy stitches of paw prints along the hedge. A hare has written a single looping sentence and leapt into the bramble's safekeeping. A small bird has made calligraphy where it bounced, light as breath, from one seed head to another. Children read this book aloud on the way to fetch water, not with noise, but with the bright whisper of discovery. Their cheeks glitter with cold. Their eyes have the clean light that winter grants as a gift. They carry the bucket carefully, so the thin glass skin on the top of the water does not crack until it meets the bowl indoors. The house wears its winter wisdom like a garment. A curtain stitched from coarse wool hangs close to the door, lifting and falling with every opening so the room does not lose too much of itself to the morning. Window shutters blink, then settle. Drafts are answered as kindly as visitors. A twist of flax pressed here, a new seam of daub tapped into place there. A bead of sheep grease smoothed along a stubborn gap that insisted on speaking last night when the wind became conversational at the eaves. Nothing is scolded. Everything is arranged. Breakfast is not a performance. It is a deep breath set on a table. Porridge brought back from the haybox, where it dreamed itself tender. A sprinkle of salt with a pinch that knows the size of the palm. A streak of honey if a sore throat is sulking in the house. A small curl of butter for those who rose earliest and thought kind thoughts while the rest slept. Bread is cut with the practiced curve of the knife, slices falling like quiet notes. A child traces a finger along the steam in the air the way another child might trace a letter. Winter is an alphabet of warmth. After bowls are rinsed and set upside down to dry, the day spreads itself like a map. Morning belongs to wood, water, and air, to splitting logs with a measured swing and a courteous ear for the grain, to carrying buckets with the shoulder-friendly balance of one full, one half full, to shoveling paths not as chores, but as letters written to neighbors. This way, and welcome. Midday gathers tasks that ask for sitting near light, mending socks at the narrow window, carding wool while the low sun makes a cushion on the floorboards, turning a heel on a stocking with a little tut of satisfaction when the gusset lies properly. Afternoon is for small journeys, to the mill with a cloth-tied measure of grain, to the parish priest with a question about a saint's day, to the old woman at the edge of the village who reads winter's aches and gives back a bundle of dried thyme and a promise that this, too, will pass if you don't chase it. The haybox, summer's echo in a wooden chest, keeps its counsel and its heat. A pot, brought to a murmuring simmer on the trivet, goes down into the nest of straw as if settling into a feather bed. The lid closes with a sound like a satisfied sigh. Hours later, when the cover is lifted, warmth comes out as a fragrance first. Beans mellowed to cream, barley softened to kindness, onions and carrots and cabbage all telling their mellow version of the garden they remember. No one rushes the spoon. The stew is allowed to say what it has learned. Children are winter's apprentices. They practice the breathing the elders taught them, through the nose, into a folded scarf, slow, a little like blowing on a sleeping ember. They learn how to keep feet willing. First a layer of soft cloth, then the sock, then the boot. When the boot comes off, it faces the hearth to remember warmth for next time. They climb the small ladder to help comb a snow-sagged thatch, one hand always on a rung, the other placing reed beside reed until the roof looks less like a hat pulled low and more like a crown. They gather kindling as if picking berries, noticing colors, silver birch curls, tawny oak slivers, the dark patience of peat. The village's life runs along well-worn lines that winter makes clearer, like streams under ice. If a door has not opened by noon, where a door always opens by noon, someone knocks with a brisk kindness and a coal jar wrapped in old linen. If a hen has been careless enough to announce her egg to the hedge, a neighbor's child returns it with two small, proud hands and a delighted tilt of the head that begs a reward no larger than a thank you. If smoke from a chimney looks thin, thicker help arrives with a bundle. No one keeps tallies except in the way a weaver keeps count of threads, not to measure debt, but to keep the pattern sound. Winter is generous with simple sacraments, a sprig of rosemary, dried above the hearth since autumn, crumbles between fingers and spills a sharp, clean joy into a simmering pot. A twist of salt over bread before the griddle makes an ordinary slice answer like a treat. A scrape of beeswax rubbed along a drawer's runner stops it from complaining and perfumes the quiet with a sunlit memory of hives and clover. A feather found on the path is stuck in a beam over the door, not as trophy, but as thanks for the wings that wrote that beautiful letter in the snow earlier. Clothes acquire their winter grammar. A cloak learns where to fold over the shoulder so that the throat lives in a small weather of its own. A cap sits low enough to gather what heat the head would otherwise lose, and high enough that listening is not muffled, because listening is a village's winter sport. Mittens are patched with the easy pride of making do. A stitched story grows on each palm. A child's scarf, once the sleeve of a father's old sweater, feels like a kind of inheritance in wool form. No one apologizes for the sheen that cloth gains when it has worked all season. It is the sheen of service, the gentle varnish of usefulness. On the table, candles stand like little sermons about measure and attention. Wicks are trimmed with a fingernail and a sense for the right length. The ends saved from spent candles are melted in a cup and poured into a mold beside new wick, so that nothing is wasted and everything is invited to begin again. A careful hand saves the drippings from a candle used during a vigil. Those wax tears are favored for easing squeaks and sealing envelopes to the priest, because they remember prayer. Light is thrifty and yet never feels stingy. It takes what the room gives and gives it back magnified by kindness. There are winter songs that never make a boast of themselves. A spinner hums nonsense syllables that match the wheel's whir and the fibers pull. A child sings to the chickens in a tone hens prefer, a tone that sounds like pebbles in a shallow stream. Someone across the lane is whistling while bringing wood to the porch. The tune is too simple to be trapped by memory, and so it is always new. Now and then, when weather allows a few neighbors to gather, a fiddle speaks up, not with brisk dance, but with the kind of slow air that knows how to lean its head against a shoulder and rest there. The church bell, muted by snow and distance, still keeps a gentle time. Midweek, it marks a saint who knew something about throats and warm drinks, and so onions are sliced and layered with honey in a little jar to become a syrup as reliable as any doctrine. On a candle feast, the wicks kept since autumn are brought out, and the house's small parliament agrees which nights in the coming month warrant flame and which are better served by ember alone. Blessing is less an event than a habit. The sign of the cross traced on a loaf before the knife, on a forehead before sleep, over the threshold when the wind changes its mind. Tools are as alive as anything in winter. The axe has a voice the hand can hear through the handle. Today, a clear note. Tomorrow, a dull one that asks for a stone across the edge. The broom has a music for corners and another for the open middle of the floor. The rushes answer back with their own faint, polite percussion. The long spoon is like a walking stick for the pot. When it stirs, the room watches as if a familiar story is being told. The hay fork is a kind of antler for the person who holds it, and together they become an animal that knows how to move straw with grace. Patterns comfort the eyes. The herringbone in a wall's daub, the ladder of rafters, the diamond glint of frost on a pane, the concentric circles in a bowl of porridge when it first meets the spoon. All of these are proofs that the world prefers order and humans are allowed to share in it. When snow falls in the afternoon, it pays respect to existing shapes, smoothing them but not erasing them, making a pillow of every sill, a muff of every hedge, a soft hat of every post. Children draw runes in the powder with sticks and learn. Without knowing they are learning, that language can be made and remade as easily as snow names. There is a courtesy about winter appetite. The stomach asks, the kitchen answers, but neither shouts. A rind of cheese is shaved into curls that look like winter flowers. A heel of yesterday's loaf becomes crisp on the stone and then soft again in a bowl of broth. A handful of dried fruit winks like jewels when it meets hot grain. No one leaves the table tight with food. Everyone leaves loosened with gratitude. Afternoons shorten themselves without apology. A person would be foolish to race them. When light begins to step backward down the lane, tasks gather their endings. The last armful of wood brought in. The bucket tripped on its side near the door, so ice cannot make trouble with the bottom. The animals visited again, so no one remembers the night as a hunger. The sky, at its kindest winter hour, becomes the blue of a robin's egg deep in a shadowed hedge, or the pale pewter of a well-used spoon. The first star makes a crisp little announcement, and the house answers with a pinched candle and a new log. Stories begin without fanfare. Someone says, "Do you remember the winter the thatch turned into a dove?" And everyone smiles because they do, or they long to hear how it happened. It was only snow slipping in a particular way and catching the last light on a curve that made a wing, but no one insists on only. Someone else says, "There was a time the bread rose while the oven was sulking, and a hand that knows ovens nods, pleased." Tales gather the room into a single creature with many listening ears. They carry no drama sharper than a splinter, and no suspense harsher than a slow thaw, and yet they satisfy because they are about what is loved. Bread, roofs, neighbors, animals, the land itself. In this season, even silence is busy. You can hear it if you sit near the banked fire and let the house speak. The small surrender of a knot in a log. The feathery sigh of a hen turning on her perch. The subtle tick of a beam cooling. The crisp whisper of snow slipping a fraction from the eave to make a new curve on the windowsill. The mind hears these and thinks, all is in its place. The heart hears them and thinks, I am in my place too. There is, inevitably, work that looks like nothing to an outsider and everything to the one who does it. Turning the straw in a mattress so the husks point toward comfort rather than away from it. Teaching boots to remember feet by warming them with a stone before they are asked to serve. Laying a spoon so its shadow tells you where it will be at dawn. Winding thread not in a ball, which rolls away and teases cats, but in a little turtle of yarn that sits obediently wherever you set it down. These modest arts are as fine a schooling as any scholar could wish for, and the degree they confer is a winter lived well. On some nights, the moon comes close enough to count the sticks in a wattle fence. It paints every ridge and hinge with a quiet silver, and people step outside for no reason except to let their thoughts be washed clean by it. The cold feels more like brightness than bite under such a moon. Breath is a ribbon. Footprints look like careful stitching. A person stands there a while with their hand on the door latch and becomes, for a few slow breaths, a tall candle themselves. Then they go back inside, relatching with the same care and the same small satisfaction as the moon does when it leaves a cloud and clicks back into place among its stars. When sleep gathers the room, it does so in layers that remember the day. The warmth released to the straw from the stones. The warmth released to the blankets from the bodies. The warmth released to hearts from the company. Beds are arranged with thoughtfulness, the sturdy sleep on the edges, the delicate in the middle, the rest in between like rungs on a ladder made of dreams. If someone wakes, they become night's steward for a little while, listening, lifting a cup to drink, tucking a corner, adding a thread of wood to the ember's small loom. And when their mind has done its rounds, they return to sleep and pass the stewardship along without ceremony. Somewhere in the early hour, when even the owls have grown quiet, a light snow begins. It is not a decision so much as a continuation of the day's mood. It collects on fences like clean thoughts and on roofs like blessings. The last ember under the ash glows, dim, undemanding, faithful. People breathe. The house breathes. The village, if you could stand above it like a kindly star, would seem to breathe too, in and out, a little warm cloud rising here and there, as tender and convincing as prayer. Dawn comes as modestly as it went. The gray rinses to a softer gray, then to blue. The snow's surface becomes a page again, ready to be written. A hand finds the poker. A face finds the cup. A foot finds the boot with toes smiling from last night's remembered warmth. The ember smiles back when the ash is drawn. The first small flame holds out its palm, and the day places its tasks into it, one by one. Water, wood, animals, bread, neighbor, mending, song. None are heavy. All are necessary. Taken together, they are a kind of music, and so the week arranges itself, each day a pearl on winter's quiet string. On market day, when the road is passable, the lane hears different voices. A barrow's wheel writes its slow punctuation marks in the snow. A woman with apples, wrinkled and wonderful, calls them keeping fruit and tells you which of them tastes faintly like July if you close your eyes while you bite. A man with a bundle of willow promises that this year's withies are particularly obedient. Someone swaps a small net of onions for a spool of thread dyed the color of a distant hillside. Plant blue worked into wool as if a piece of the sky has agreed to be worn on a sleeve. Midweek, the smith lets a red mouth open in the heart of winter and speaks to it with tongs and hammer, the way all smiths speak to their small domestic sons. The ring of iron on iron is never harsh. Even its brightness has been taught the manners of snow. People step in, warmed by more than the forge, and step out, their tools made newly willing by the smith's fluent hands. On the way home, they notice that icicles have learned to be bells under the eaves. A finger taps one lightly, just once, to check its note and to say, without words, that the day is pleased. Another day, a neighbor's roof deigns to complain after a night of wind. Ladders sprout like careful trees along the eaves. Hands go up, hats sit down snug over ears, and the roof, mollycoddled and combed, remembers its duty and regains its good humor. No one calls this a chore. They call it a visit, because that is what it is. A neighborly call paid to a thatch that has held a family's sleep. A courtesy returned to a roof that has been courteous under weather. When the baker's boy passes with a sack over his shoulder that smells like the idea of bread itself, dogs remember their good manners and sit, tails swaying like slow pendulums. The boy, king for a minute by right of fragrance, administers pats as if distributing benedictions. Children trail, not asking, only watching. Noses rehearsing grown-up appreciation. The world seems richer for a time simply because a human is carrying yeast and flour together in the right proportion. It is a sermon you can smell and one you do not need to understand to be better for. Winter's evenings contain their own library. There are books here without pages. The seam where two planks meet and speak of the tree they once were. The pattern of soot on a beam, denser where summer's cooking lived. Lighter where the tarry smoke seldom reached. The star map of salt thrown against a threshold in last week's storm, now dry and leaving a line that says the house was cared for. People read these books without knowing they are reading. Knowledge becomes a kind of reflex. At the month's turn, the midwife, who has hands like late-lying snow, cool, sure, evaporating leave-behinds that reveal rather than cover, comes to sit by the fire and report softly that a child is expected in a house near the willow gate. The village listens with the kind of attention that never feels like prying. A jar is filled without discussion and set aside. A cloak is found for the walk that will be walked at an odd hour. A kettle is promised a longer simmer a fortnight hence. Winter makes a conspiracy of care, kind and competent. As the season deepens, little changes right themselves, where only careful eyes will catch them. The sun, still brief, stands now a finger-width higher when it slopes across the hill. The water in the bucket takes a breath before accepting a new skin of ice overnight, as if asking whether it quite agrees with the plan. A chicken, impulsive with hope, lays an egg 2 days in a row, and then, embarrassed by its boldness, takes a day's rest. Children begin to speak of the pond in the past tense, as if skating were a story they can put on a shelf for the future. All small, all unmistakable. Faith keeps pace with this soft turning. Candles for the season's midpoint are brought to the church in someone's apron and brought home in someone else's cap, and it does not matter who belongs to which because the flame belongs to all. The priest speaks of light returning not as a blow struck, but as a hand laid on the shoulder. People nod in time with their own thought, that this is how warmth always wins, not with conquest, but with continuance. On such a night, after the service, the village glows like a handful of bees in a dusk field, pockets of gold against the blue. Children drowse on benches without deciding to. Elders smile into the middle distance where memory sits, knitting. Bread on plates makes the air smell like forgiveness. The wind, discovering it is not needed, goes elsewhere. There is, tucked into the deepest part of winter, a day that you could miss if you only looked at the sky. It lives instead in the ear and the hand. The straw in the mattress learns a new direction and sighs. The axe comes down once and splits a log that had been thoughtful for weeks. The buyer's door latch closes without catching. The bucket's iron ring makes a friendlier note. None of these announce spring. They announce something gentler. That winter has decided you belong to it, and in that belonging, it bends a little to let you walk through with more ease. Sleep arrives earlier on such days, and it is welcome. The ember is covered and told a secret, which it keeps. The last cup is drunk, the last story folded, the last sock admired for its mended heel as if it were a saint's relic. People lie down with the sensation of threads drawn in and tied off at the right place. Cats take their commas, dogs their question marks, people their full stops, with the generous thought that tomorrow's sentence can begin wherever it likes. A quiet snowfall in the early hours erases the day's scrawls without scolding them. The lane becomes a fresh page. The hedge wears a muff like a duchess. The roof grows an extra inch of kindness. Someone wakes, hears the particular hush snow writes, and smiles into the dark. The pillow keeps the smile for them. When dawn performs its slow unfurling again, the house, truer than any clock, has its work arranged in the same right order it did yesterday and will tomorrow. No 2 mornings are identical, and yet everyone is exactly enough. The poker lifts ash. The ember wakes. The kettle hums. The door opens and then closes with brisk affection. A cow breathes her milky breath. A child finds the foot warmer with their feet. A neighbor lifts a hand across the lane. The day nods back. Winter's gift is not austerity. It is attention. It teaches that a life can be lit by small, dependable fires. that a village is a quilt and every square matters, that breath is a thread and warmth is the cloth it makes, that time, given patience, will work on us the way it works on wood and wool, seasoning, softening, making us sound. And here, in this steady season, the lesson is learned by doing, by resting, by sharing, by being gently exact about the small, honorable things. Let the evening come again without hurry. Let the ember offer its shy orange eye. Let hands move in that choreography of care that this house knows as well as it knows its own beams. Let the stew return to the table with its kindly steam, and the bread give off its good scent. Let conversation be the slow water that shapes stone. Let laughter be winter's own kind of blossom. Let the bed be straw and wool and mercy. Let the night be long, because long nights make deep rest, and deep rest makes the body remember it is loved. Sleep now, while the snow throws its soft handfuls against the door, and the stars keep their crisp, remote watch. Sleep while the roof, well-combed and well-pinned, wears its white cap and thinks old wooden thoughts about shelter. Sleep while the ember keeps its vague, warm promise beneath the ash. Sleep while the village is a breathing thing under the moon, a single creature with many rooms. Sleep and let winter, pleased with your trust, set another small stitch in the quilt it is making of your days. The depth of winter lingers with steady patience, and the village has matched its pace. Nights are long, but not lonely. Days are short, but amply filled with modest work, and every hour has learned to move more slowly, like a stream that thickens into ice, yet still remembers how to sing beneath the white. Outside, the fields sleep beneath a quilt sewn by countless small snows, each fall adding another soft layer that smooths the ground into kindly curves. Hedges stand like dark stitching along the edges of things, and the trees make delicate handwriting against a sky that still carries the pale color of tin. Nothing hurries. Nothing begs to be different than it is. The season holds its note, and people listen. Morning enters the way a careful guest enters a sick room, quietly, with respect for what is already happening. The window panes, latticed in lead, have grown small forests overnight. Ferny frost that flourished in the cold, silvering the glass with leaves that never existed in the hedgerow, and yet appear truer than any leaf that ever rustled in wind. Breath curls in the air, visible and honest, and the first movement is not a stretch or a word, but a sound no larger than a whisper, the soft scrape of a poker at the hearth. This is winter's first ritual and its greatest kindness. Ash is drawn aside in little dunes, and under that pale hill, an ember opens its sleepy orange eye. It has kept its promise through the night. It is small but unafraid. Kindling waits in a basket woven from last summer's withies, the rods now mellow with use. A curl of birch bark lies ready because bark remembers fire more quickly than wood does. Two slender sticks are set like a child's letter A, a third laid gently across, and then comes breath, not a blow, but a warm cupping, the human answer to cold. Flame arrives in the smallest way, as if embarrassed to have made anyone wait, then strengthens, then remembers how to speak. It cracks politely, it sighs, and its light puts a bloom on the faces in the room as surely as summer used to put a bloom on fruit. The room itself changes its manners. Shadows that have been flat and gray soften around the edges, as if they too have remembered how to be friendly. The smell of wood smoke, this winter's vocabulary, threads through the rush scent and the faint sweetness of dried herbs hung from a beam. Rosemary like a whisper of old gardens, sage that has grown warm as wool, A twist of lavender saved from a poacher's hedge in July, now keeping dignity in February. The kettle, sooty from good service, slides a little closer to the heat on its iron hook. When it begins to mutter, nothing more than that, just a contented mutter. It is the day's first music. Breakfast is the simplest spell. Porridge coaxed to thickness in a clay pot whose glaze is crazed like cracked ice, stirred with a spoon whose bowl is the exact shape of comfort. Salt is pinched between careful fingers and let fall like the smallest snow. A child, grave with importance, is allowed to drop in the spoon of honey, amber that remembered flowers even as frost rhymed the world. Bread, backed against the hearthstone to renew rather than transform it, sighs when the heat finds the crumb. A gobbet of last year's butter, kept cool in the north corner of the house, wrapped and re-wrapped in linen, softens without quite melting. An edible promise that there will always be some July hidden in February if you go about the looking quietly. Before the day grows taller, the door's wooden tongue lifts with a familiar thrum, and the yard says its cold greeting. Boots remember the shape of feet, their toes warmed last night by a stone wrapped in worn cloth and tucked at the bed's foot. Frost crusts the bucket's lip and offers the palm a blunt fact. Winter is not cruel, only exact. The byre is a degree warmer than outside, and the animal's breath is visible generosity. A cow turns her great mild head, a brown planet drifting with contentment. She knows the hour better than any bell. A goat looks offended at nothing in particular, and then forgives it. Chickens hop from their beam with the same surprised dignity every morning. The ice on the water's surface yields to a mallet's tap, then breaks into floating mirrors that turn themselves thoughtfully when lifted aside. Hay is pulled from a rack, the crispest of the stems a memory of scythes and laughter under a high sun. Grain is poured with a low, friendly shush into a trough that has learned patience and patched edges. A hand, bare for a moment, learns again that the hide of a cow is warmth arranged into kindness. The dog, every village has such a dog, waits for permission that has never once been denied, and then stands guard while hens discover what hens always discover, that food tastes better if first announced in a soft cluck. Back inside, the floor has the hospitable look of a field. Rushes laid loosely where feet desire softness, their green not yet surrendered to brown, their fragrance a green sentence you can read without letters. The old layer is lifted, always from the edges first, always with gratitude. It carries away the week's small stories in crumbs and chaff. A nutshell, the thread crumb of wool carding, a fallen button that hides for the joy of being found. Fresh bundles are opened with the solemn joy people reserve for the ordinary. The floor becomes meadow again. Children kneel by instinct and make roads with fingers, and a saint in a bottle-bright window seems to smile more clearly as the room's breath freshens. Mid-morning opens its hand and offers clear light, the sort that never brags and yet shows you everything. The grain in a beam, the nick on a spoon, the far line of a hedge that was simply a smell when it was cut in October, and now stands thin and sound under snow. Work waits outside, but it does not tap its foot. Wood must be split while the air is still. The axe does not complain, because it has been kept honest. The whetstone wore a groove into its own surface to teach the edge humility. You can hear the truth of a split, a pitch that rings the way a bell rings when the smith has spoken the right language to iron. The pieces are stacked not in any old heap, but with the sense that wood deserves to breathe and repay itself in warmth later. The roof asks for attention, the way a kindly elder asks for a shawl. A ladder goes up with care, its feet scotched with a wedge so no winter joke is played. Thatched roofs obey hands that obey old instruction. A comb woven from ash and bound with rawhide persuades reeds into order. New handfuls, last summer's reeds that smell, if you close your eyes, like dragonflies, are tucked and pinned with hazel pegs. From above, the village is a page of small sentences, each cottage writing with its ridge and its smoke. I keep them safe. They keep me repaired. We belong to one another. The path between houses is a text the day edits as needed. Overnight signatures of fox and hare are read with scholarly interest by small boots. Fox prints run like dotted lines sewn straight through the seam of the hedge. Hare loops are punctuation marks of a creature that remembered something just in time and changed its mind. Children, who are always the best scholars of weather, translate prints into stories and carry those stories indoors like the first spring cup of water. By noon, the sun has climbed as far as it intends. Tempered, reasonable, clean, and the short bright of the day pours through the window and lays a bar of gold on the table, exactly where hands will want it for work. Midday is the hour when the door might knock without importing trouble. A neighbor arrives inside a cloak freckled with snow and carries a loaf within a cloth that remembers someone's mother. In exchange, a wedge of cheese lifts easily from a crock. This is not barter. This is grammar. The sentences are, "We are supplied, and we are mindful, and we will be supplied again." The meal is made of things that traveled faithfully from warm seasons to cold without losing identity. A pot of beans that's soaked since starlight rises to simmer. And the kitchen hears a new music, the quiet tapping of skins against clay. Onions, sliced thin with the knife that knows exactly how to be sharp and exactly how not to be cruel. Soften in fat saved with care. And the smell is the precise smell of supper in every decent century. Cabbage surrenders its crispness and gains sweetness. Parsnips give their dessert-like secret without charging extra. Bread, brown, dense, alive with good keeping, accepts heat at its edges and becomes a more forgiving version of itself. A mug of small ale sits beside each bowl. It is a thick, patient drink that understands the stomach's work and sees the body to the next task. No one calls any of this feast, and yet it feasts them. After the table is wiped with a cloth that has had a long life, apron, then towel, then rag, and soon to be tinder. Afternoon invites the kind of work winter was invented to protect. Spinning begins. A distaff is dressed with washed wool that still carries the faintest memory of lanolin, and hands that learned from other hands draw it into the quiet miracle of thread. The spindle drops and rises in a rhythm as old as weather. Twist travels from fingers into fiber and makes it stronger, gentler, and longer. There is no impatience here. If a knot appears, it is teased apart and smoothed, not scolded. The spinner hums, and the wheel hums, and the rooms hum, a three-part harmony, seems to say that history is nothing more than labor done kindly. At the loom, winter's geometry is put into practice. Warp threads, held in strict order, except a visiting weft that passes through with the deference of a guest placing gifts into a host's hands. The heddle rises and lowers. The shuttle slips and returns. Each thrown line is a sentence the cloth agrees to remember. Nothing flashy, a twill that sheds water, a plain weave that will take a dye or stand fair as undyed snow. The weaver watches the selvage like a shepherd watches the edge of a flock. Attentiveness now prevents heartache later. Mending is winter's favorite virtue. A sock heel, thinned by months of honest walking, receives a small woven island. Warp of wool looped from side to side on a darning mushroom, weft of matching thread patiently woven in. The patch looks like sunlight on water when turned to the light, and when turned toward the shoe, it looks like anonymity. In usefulness, invisibility is a kind of beauty. A mitten's thumb is reinforced, a cloak's hem re-whipped, a child's tunic given a new button shaped from bone that once learned how to be part of a creature and now learns how to be part of a childhood. The house grows stronger without anyone raising a voice. Across the lane, the smith raises a small domestic sun in his forge, and its glow writes poetry on the snow. If a hinge is stubborn, iron can be taught its citizenship again. If a hook is needed for the hearth, a length of bar iron accepts a curl that looks like a fern and holds like an oath. The smith's hammer is not a weapon. It is punctuation, steady as a heartbeat. Children sometimes are allowed 3 careful strokes. They carry the permission home on their faces like a blessed ash rubbed on a brow. When weather allows, market day lays its little fare upon the green. Stalls are boards lifted onto barrels. A woman appears with skeins of wool dyed in the old botanic ways. Woad blue cooler than shaded water. Welled yellow as if the sun had decided to be string. Madder red that remembers clay and blood and berry without becoming any of them. Onions are plaited into ropes gleaming like lanterns. Apples that kept their cheer in straw tell you by scent which tree they grew on. A cooper shows his newest hoop, and a child touches it as if stroking a halo. There is talk as gentle as snowfall. A cow calved backward, but is well. A pilgrim passed through sleeping in the chapel porch and left a wooden charm by way of thanks. The road across the marsh is firm for another week. By late afternoon, the light grows blue at the edges and begins to step back toward evening, the way a careful host steps back to let guests find their own goodbyes. Animals are fed once more. The byre is cleaned in little half-moons of movement, the fork's tines finding their way by muscle memory. Bedding is shaken out, shaken, not scolded, and laid anew. The ice in the trough is broken again. Each sheet is lifted like an old letter, admired in the way all old things deserve admiration, and set to one side where it will become nothing at its leisure. The yard itself is brushed in 2 directions, so that snow knows its manners, and boots remember their trust in the ground. Indoors, the house draws its circle narrower. Tallow candles are encouraged to stand straight by fingers that have learned the right pinch. Wicks are trimmed with a nail catch and a soft there. The rushlight is lit for hallway work and will be saved for nightly visits to the ash when the house's heart needs checking. On the hearth, the evening pot refuses to hurry. Barley has become patience, cabbage has become kindness, onion has become wisdom, and a bone, used on Monday, coaxed again on Thursday, and surrendered almost down to silence, delivers the last of its generosity. People forgive their own hunger a little earlier than usual because the smell has arrived, and it is sufficient to be warmed by anticipation. Supper is taken seriously, but not solemnly. Bowls are warmed by the fire, a small grace that makes a large difference. The first ladle goes to the oldest, not because they asked, but because the house knows the order of things and obeys it without drama. Bread is broken with hands that have never forgotten how to share. Salt is on the table not as luxury, but as the old agreement between the living and the living. A pickle is brought forward from the cool shelf, and the bright vinegar makes the stew brighter. Like a bell rung once in a church at dusk, talk happens in low exchange. The fox again, the thaw that tried yesterday, then reconsidered. The child's tooth that wobbles and will soon pay for a sweet in a saint's name. Laughter keeps its hat on indoors, but still enters the room. It never disturbs the animals resting or the neighbor 3 houses away, who might be listening for quiet. When bowls are rinsed clean with a dipper of hot water and a twist of cloth, the water saved to oil a hinge later and not thrown away. The evening opens like a valise and produces its small stores. A sleeve that needs basting with even stitches. A spoon that needs a brighter bowl carved from its dull. A strap that asks for a new hole and receives one with the all's exact opinion. Someone holds a candle in such a way that the worker's hands look like a saint's in a painted panel. Lit from one side, steady, worn in holy ways by common tasks. A child is set a task with the blessing of constraint. Sort the beans by shape, not color. Or wrap the candle stubs in waxed linen to wait for the next pouring. Or tie the onions tighter so their braids do not yawn before Lent is out. Stories come in the dialect of winter, slowly, without cliff or precipice. There is the one about the winter when bread rose out of pure habit, even though the kitchen was a world of ice. Someone remembers, someone confirms, someone else says they were too small then to be of any use, but sat in a basket near the hearth and approved. There is the one about the smith, who made a hinge so strong the door thanked him and swung true for 20 years. There is a tale of a mare that chose a mild morning to foal and a snow that arrived just as the foal stood. Both are presented as proof that weather is not indifferent, only impersonal. None of this seeks applause. The fire listens, the rafters remember. On bird-silent nights, the moon comes left-handed over the oaks and writes a clean silver path along the frozen ruts of the lane. Someone steps out for the pleasure of stepping out and discovers the kind of cold that polishes thought. Breath becomes ribbon. Snow becomes salt thrown on black cloth. The hedges stand in a posture that is half blessing, half attention. The latch lifted again. The door closes without scolding, and a palm rests against the panel a second longer than necessary. A thank you to wood that once grew in a coppice and now keeps a family in its care. When the house prepares for sleep, it does so by baker's logic, setting tomorrow's loaf with tonight's yeast. The fire is spooned into its ash cradle. No one buries it, they bed it. And the little mountain is smoothed with the back of a shovel until only the faintest glow shows where the day's heart will keep beating for the night. The kettle is edged nearer to give the dawn a head start. Shoes are put with their toes to the heat and their heels to the room. The old trick that makes leather remember generosity. A stone warmed at the hearth is wrapped in a cloth that has wrapped stones for years and passes from hand to hand until it arrives at the bed like a visiting saint. No crown, no thunder. Only the precisely measured warmth that reaches the feet first, and then, by gentle degrees, tells the shoulders they are not alone. Beds are maps of the house's knowledge. The strongest sleep at the capable edge, the small within, the ones with cough near the fire's side, the ones who rise to check embers near the door. Straw has been turned earlier, every stalk persuaded to lie with its soft end toward the body. Blankets, brown, sheepy, respectable, are drawn without snapping. Cloaks come down from pegs and agree to work one more night. A cap is tied under a chin by fingers that learned the knot from someone who learned it, from someone who learned it beneath a thatch, 2 generations gone. Cats curl into punctuation. Commas at the knee, semicolons near the ankle, the elegant full stop of a tail across a wrist. If wakefulness visits, no one treats it as an enemy. The house offers its quiet employments. Lift the lid of the haybox and feel the stored sun still at work in a pot put there hours ago. Lay a palm above the ash and judge the ember's progress by skin sense. Stand at the small square of window and name 3 constellations. And then, as alms to the night, choose one you do not know and promise to ask the priest or the shepherd its name. A cough is eased with onion syrup that took 2 evenings to coax from onion and honey into treaty. A child's forehead receives a touch measured exactly between worry and reassurance. The rushlight is snuffed between pinched, wetted fingers. The tiny smoke's line rises straight, then vanishes like good advice followed without fuss. Dreams in such houses do not throw their weight about. They do their errands quietly, returning you to a garden path where bees stitched yellow into the air, placing in your hands the weight of a loaf that will not be baked until April, showing you the roof from above and how the snow lies on it like a blessing, seating you at a market stall where you barter nothing but smiles and go home heavier than you arrived. When you wake, you cannot say whether these were dreams or recollections borrowed from someone older. It does not matter. They have fed you. By the smallest degrees, morning rehearses again its entrance. The dark loosens a lace along the edges of things. The frost fern on the window grows brighter, then begins to fade as its painter is distracted by dawn. The dog sighs the soft note that means not yet, but soon. Somewhere outside, a robin cannot help itself and tries a phrase of song, stops, thinks better of optimism, and saves the rest for a day that will appreciate it more. The ember, when asked, admits to having lived. It answers the poker with a friendly orange. Kindling leans, breath arrives, and fire writes its first word of the new day. Tasks step forward in exactly the right order and exactly the right number. Water asks for lifting. Wood asks for splitting. Animals ask without asking, and the hands know their grammar. Bread dough will be started today, made not with vanity, but with regard for how the week likes to be shaped. The quernstone will be turned for as long as it takes to feel one's bones settle into their comfortable places. The thatch will be combed again, never because it failed, only because care is never wasted. A neighbor will be checked upon. No drama, just a loaf left by a latch and a knock that does not insist upon being answered. The lane will be swept because a miller's cart may come, and dignity is a broom's best friend. Later in the week, the church will ask for candles and receive them. Tapers that carry the fingerprints of those who dipped wick into beeswax while the hive slept. Small cressets that will burn beside the font so winter's children are greeted by flame as well as water. A bell will speak in the tone it reserves for ordinary holiness. No sermon will be grand. It will be fit for a table rather than a throne. People will come away with the sensation of having been fed something mild and good, like broth given to a fever that wishes to behave itself. What winter teaches again and again is exactness without severity. A door is shut fully but never slammed. A cloak is folded, so the shoulder keeps its shape. A basket is loaded, so its weight rides the hip, not the back. A child is praised for stealing heat from a sun square on the floor and learning the economy of standing where warmth stands. A cow is thanked aloud, not as folly, but as the most sensible accounting, because gratitude spoken into warm flanks makes milk a friend rather than a wage. All of this is the same as yesterday, and delightfully not the same. The light will fall on a different knot in the beam. The fox will write a new sentence. The kettle will decide to whisper at a slightly higher pitch. The spoon's handle will take on a deeper gloss where the thumb rests. The dog will choose a different place to lie and will pretend this was a plan. The repetition is the point. The small differences are the music. Together they are winter's long hymn. Evening will come again, offering its familiar pockets. Soup, bread, hands, lamp, story. The ember will be bedded again. The moon will make a path again, or else will keep its lamp hooded, and the stars will carry the evening without complaint. Sleep will gather its folds, generous as a winter cloak, and lay them over shoulders honored by the day's work. And somewhere just as eyes close, the mind will make its plainest blessing, that the house stands, that the roof holds, that neighbors breathe, that the ember keeps its quiet vow, that the morning will come not because anyone deserves it, but because it always does. So let the night spread. Let the snow go on writing its polished script along the hedges. Let the rafters resettle their long timber thoughts. Let the dog dream of following a scent that is not urgent and returning for praise that is guaranteed. Let your breath ease into the rhythm the kettle set and the fire confirmed. Winter keeps its vigil exact and kind. The village sleeps inside that kindness. And you, in the middle of the house, inside the circle of light that was banked with ash and patience, may now sleep too, long, gently, without alarm, until the first careful footstep of morning comes to the hearth, and the ember opens its orange eye. Late winter has its own clock, quieter than all the others. A clock that does not strike, only breathes. The village, which once braced itself against the first hard frosts, now moves with the practiced rhythm of those who have kept vigil for many nights and found a way to be both patient and content. The snow no longer surprises, it converses. The wind is no longer an adversary, it is a letter carrier, bringing the slow mail of weather across fields that lie in a long white pause. Nothing dramatic insists upon itself. The days are small but whole, like round pebbles turned in a stream until all their edges have become agreeable. Morning comes with the sound of a quiet house remembering its uses. The ember, tucked under ash at midnight, greets the poker with a soft, faithful glow. The hearth's first orange blooms as if it had simply needed permission. The kettle, having slept a step from warmth, takes only a moment to find its low, happy murmur. Frost flowers grow along the rim of the window, and then, without complaint, begin to vanish on their own schedule. They do not need anyone to witness their beauty to complete their work. A hand, still warm from blankets, lifts the wool curtain from the door's seam and tests the draft there. Another hand reaches for the bundle of birch curls saved in autumn and lays them like feathers where the ember will find them friendly. A breath, never rushed, never blown out of impatience, completes the ceremony. The room changes key. Breakfast answers with the old modesty, porridge that thickens in the trustworthy clay pot, a heel of bread coaxed back to tenderness on the warm stone, a spoonful of honey that tastes like last August even when the snow presses its face against the window. The youngest, always the youngest, gets the first spoonful, not because the youngest is a prince or a queen, but because the village agrees it is a good policy to let the smallest carry the earliest heat. The elder in the room takes the second, and the two bites together feel like a promise the day intends to keep. Outside, the yard wears the scars and kindnesses of many days. The path has been swept and swept again until it knows itself. The woodpile has settled inward under its roof and now leans into the shape of a low hill. The logs at its face, carefully chosen, show the clean, pale halves where the axe learned each grain's logic. The byre door opens with a sound like a well-satisfied sigh. Inside are the warm lungs of winter, milk animals with the patient look that knows how to turn plant and water into food and comfort. Steam rises from their backs when the light hits them just so. The smell is honest, thick with hay and breath, and the faint sweetness of stored apples somewhere under the loft stair. Water is broken from its thin lid of ice and offered in generous pans. Grain pours from the scoop in a steady hush. A hand that learned this work years ago follows each movement with the kind of attention that never grows bored. A cow leans her heavy head into a broad palm and gives up a small fraction of the fear that winters sometimes store in bodies. A goat negotiates, as goats will, her own set of terms, half play, half philosophy. Chickens scuttle down from the perch like clergy leaving choir stalls, each with an opinion she intends to keep to herself until the third grain falls. Back indoors, the house puts on clean rushes the way a river puts on light. The old layer, lifted away, shows a map of crumbs and threads and the minute treasures of living. A bead, a lost kernel, a chip of whittled wood shaped like a moon. The new layer goes down with both hands and a little hum, that unconscious music of approval people make when their senses agree. The green aroma, part meadow, part riverbank, revises the room. It is ordinary magic, the kind of change that alters nothing and improves everything. Mid-morning is honest work. The roof combed and pinned where last night's wind pressed its thumb. The shutter pegged at a better angle. The fence line checked where snow slumped along rails. The gate lifted and settled again, so its latch lands clean as a thought. A ladder is walked to the eaves with the courtesy a person shows an elder. The thatch, stroked by a comb bound from ash, remembers itself and lies true. Reeds slide into their new company with the small sound of friendship. A dry whisper, a nod, a staying put. From up there, one can see the village as a ring of careful breaths. Each chimney contributes a little thread of blue that rises slow and straight on good days, and slower and straighter on better ones. The road is quiet, but it is not empty. Tracks speak as clearly as voices when you have learned to listen. A fox has written a neat line along the hedge as if underlining the field's name. A hare has looped a question, and then a better answer. A man's boot marks lead toward the mill, where the water still works beneath the ice. Obedient to the narrow race the miller cut years ago with the patience of a monk copying a noble page, the wheel turns and turns in a winter dialect, slower, deeper, and grain that slept in sacks becomes flour that will sleep again, more briefly, before it becomes bread. Inside, the winter crafts continue their schooling. Spinning carries on in the corner, where the window's thin light tells the fingers what they are doing without making a fuss about it. The distaff wears a soft cloud of wool, and the spindle tucks that cloud into a strong line. Twist runs ahead of the fingers, then returns when asked, docile as a well-brought-up dog. The spinner hums, not a song so much as a shape for breath, and the sound settles into the beams with all the other winter hums. Kettle, fire, small ale in the jug, the clockless patience of stew. At the loom, the weft does its kind work across the warp, thread by thread, until cloth appears like a path after snow. The beater's soft thump is the heart of the house in afternoon. Color is quiet, undyed wool the shade of doves, a line of warm brown like a field in November, a thin blue stripe to honor the river when no one has seen water's true color for weeks. Such cloth will not astonish. It will endure, and endurance is this season's art. A pair of hands that choose endurance become lovely along the way, scarred in the tender places, polished in the strong ones, and never ashamed of either. Mending, too, continues its benevolent conspiracy. Socks accept small woven islands at their heels. Mittens get new thumbs fitted like good advice. A boy's tunic takes a patch-shaped square and sewn steady. and he pretends not to notice he likes it better that way. A wooden spoon is resanded where the soup taught it humility, then oiled with the last of the walnut pressed in autumn from nuts the squirrels overlooked. A scythe sleeps under the rafters with its blade slathered in tallow, and the tallow gleams as the fire tightens the room's light toward evening. At midday, a knock comes that is not an emergency. It is only courtesy, which is the best kind of knock. The neighbor's cloak spills a small flurry onto the threshold. He brings a bottle with a cured throat of wax and a length of sausage the color of old brick. He leaves with a loaf and 2 onions plaited like hair. Between the exchange, a report that the widow at the far end of the lane has found her appetite again. A word that the smith's daughter's cough has gone down the stairs rather than up. A mention that a cart is expected from the next parish after Sunday if the road keeps its promise. The conversation is unhurried the way the river is unhurried under ice. Not stopped, just deliberate. The meal is ready because the haybox kept watch more faithfully than any clock. A pot lifted from its strawy nest lifts the room with it. Beans have become velvet. Barley has become sense. Onion has become faith. Cabbage has become cheer. A crack of pepper reserved from a market day, saved as if it were a bright secret, wakes the bowl. A shred of last summer's sage remembers the garden. Bread meets steam and gives off a fragrance so good that it feels like a hymn whose words everyone knows without remembering where they learned them. There is ale, small and mild, because winter agrees with modest comforts more than with loud ones. Afternoon asks for measured errands before the light thinks about leaving. The lane is walked to the church door and back. No reason but to confirm that the bell rope hangs straight and that the snow took nothing of consequence when it slipped from the porch roof. The graveyard wears its white like a garment that fits everyone, and the names on the stones are softened into single, dear ideas. Father, mother, friend. No one lingers, and no one rushes. On the way home, a fallen bough gives up a limb for kindling. The rest is laid aside for the hedge creatures to negotiate with the thaw when it finally comes. Courtesy extends to wood and to weather. Both remember. Light draws to blue. That last clean color winter gives before night irons everything into common darkness. Lamps are set. Tallow candles that need trimming once. Oil lamps that need their wicks coaxed steady. Rushlights for carrying from bed to hearth in the small hours. The hearth itself grows confident. Never wild, never greedy. Just a higher, warmer republic of coals with a few polite flares for pleasure. The pot is shifted nearer. The dog is invited closer by the movement of a foot, and it obeys the invitation with dignity, as if it had thought of it first. Supper earns no trumpets and gets none. Bowls are warmed, not to show off, but to be kind to what they will hold. The eldest is served first, the youngest second, and the rest in the order the house's logic remembers. Salt sits in a little wooden pig. Its lid slides with that particular music salt lids have, and pinches are taken with the mild solemnity of people who know salt is not merely flavor, but a covenant with food. A pickle appears, bright as a small trumpet in vinegar. It resets the mouth's attention the way a bell resets a village's afternoon. Words are few and better for being few. Laughter comes as steam comes, unexpected, inevitable, cheerful. After bowls are cleaned and put to rest, the evening unrolls its simple page. A strap to punch new holes in, a spoon to feather at its edge, a latch to oil, a child's book, if there is one, to turn carefully with slow fingers. If there is no book, there are the rafters, which have kept their own library in smoke. faint drawings from years of cooking that can be read if you know the grammar of soot. There are stories, but they are not the world's stories that rattle sabers and fling grief into rooms. These are house stories. How the north wall learned to be polite to wind. How the flock once walked home ahead of a storm without needing a shepherd. How a certain pot always burns at the south side unless the poker is laid just so across the grate. These tales are accurate enough to be useful and round enough to be comforting. Music comes as needed, not demanded. A reed pipe tells a tune as simple as a path across snow. A fiddle offers a slow air that warms the mind without warming the feet. Stamping is for barn gatherings and haymaking nights. Not now. Humming is the commonest instrument. It fills the cracks of thought with something better than thought. The house listens and adds its own notes. The beam that ticks as heat climbs into it and makes it remember its years as a tree. The faint rustle of hens shifting on the high pole in the byre. The kettle's little shapes of breath up toward the hood. All of it says, without any single part deciding to say it, that the world is present and you are in it, and you do not need to do any more than keep faith with small things. On certain nights, the moon lingers like a visitor who does not take a chair, but stands near the door with a pleasant expression. Its light moves along the lane, not as a path one must follow, but as a path one could. A door opens softly because the hinge was tended earlier and is grateful. Someone steps out to give the sky its due and to let the cold clean the mind. Stars are nails tapping the roof of the world into place. A fox crosses the meadow about his private business and becomes, for a breath, a stitch of black thread on a white sleeve. The watcher's breath purls upward and joins the world's common cloud. There is no wish. There is only looking. Back inside, the last duties are tender and exact. The ember bedded under ash, the kettle eased near the coals, the boots set like sleepers with their faces toward heat, the stone wrapped in the cloth that smells faintly of smoke and years of use. Bedding is rebuilt from the day's learning. Straw turned and returned so its soft ends meet skin. Blankets shaken and layered with the certainty that they will be needed. Cloaks pledged for one more night's guard. The child whose cough has been persuaded to behave lies in the middle. Babies and elders in such a season are always the village's center, and sleeps with that loose fidelity the young have toward life. A hand rests on a small shoulder. Another hand rests on the first. The weight travels thus through all the generations present. Sometimes a wakefulness comes that belongs to the season more than to the person who feels it. No one fears it. The house makes room for such wakefulness in the way a good bench makes room for a cat. The rushlight leads the way to the hearth without argument. Ash is drawn aside just enough to show the ember's steady heart. A small stick enters the small kingdom and makes no disturbance beyond a modest brightening. A sip is taken from the kettle after the lip has been warmed by breath. The heat moves outward through chest and shoulder and then down the arms until the fingers become the right shapes for sleep. A window is looked through. The night nods back. The rushlight is pinched, its tiny ribbon of smoke writing a brief letter to the beam. The bed regathers. The dream refines. The wakefulness remembers it came only to be noticed and goes away satisfied. Late winter carries a handful of church days that arrive without the fanfare of harvest feasts and yet assemble the village with as much feeling. Candle blessing has passed and left behind tapers whose light seems to stand straighter because it was asked to do so. A saint for throats has been thanked. Onion syrup is ladled into spoons with a confidence that would make a physician nod. Another saint, quiet, fond of hearths and oxen, receives a few extra coins in the poor box, not because anyone has much to spare, but because winter has taught again that having enough is a fortune not to be hidden. The priest's words are plain. They never try to climb above the rafters. They sit in the pews like good bread, and people take them home in their pockets. Work meets worship the way right and left hands meet. On the green, when the road allows, a market comes with its modest wonders. A crock of beer balm for the baker whose yeast shrugged on Tuesday. Skeins dyed with the memory of summer plants. Woodruff and bedstraw weld and wode. A woman with a tray of pins and needles who says, smiling, that even winter must submit to sharpness sometimes. A boy sells nets mended by a grandfather's careful sight and a finger's permanent bend. Someone offers soap that smells faintly of ash and rosemary. Someone else offers a salve whose secret is no secret. Fat, beeswax, patience, and the belief that skin can be persuaded to be whole again. There is talk, always this talk, that holds the village like mortar. How the bridge beyond the willows fared in the last thaw. Whether the midwife will be called to the far farm before the next moon. If the miller means to marry after all. And to whom, and why not sooner? The season loosens by degrees so small that only the faithful notice. A drop forms and falls from an eave at the warmest part of the day, then forms again and does not quite fall. The snow takes on the faint gray of work rather than the bright white of theater. A hen lays 2 days in a row, and then, embarrassed by her bravery, takes a day off as if to prove she is still sensible. The water in the bucket puts on a film later than it did last week. The sun tests the high road for a minute longer each afternoon and finds it worth walking. No one says the word spring aloud. It is too large a word to be spoken while breath still makes smoke. But the word stoops over the village like a cloud that will, when it wishes, drop rain rather than snow. There is a custom, each village has its own, that on a certain evening of late winter, when the moon chooses to be large and frank and the wind chooses to be absent, people set a candle in the smallest window of the house facing the lane. Not a show, not a festival, just a little declaration that the village remains, that the hearths are alive, that a traveler as foolish as a traveler could be in such a season would still find here a form of mercy shaped like a stool and a bowl. The candles make a seam of soft fire along the curve of the road. Children look up and remember the stars. Elders look down and remember nights when candles were fewer and still enough. Someone says, not to anyone in particular, "There," and the word is sufficient. On such a night, dreams are busy and benevolent. They bring old gardens into the mind, rows and bees and a wind that threads through bean flowers. They bring the smell of peat smoke from a memory that does not belong to anyone in the bed, and yet is accepted without question. They bring a basket of blue eggs or a jar in which a moth taps, free to leave if it could remember it knows how. In the dreams, the house sighs like a good dog, and the land breathes like a sleeping ox, and the village turns a page in a book written without ink. Morning again. The frost is less assertive on the pane. The ember has needed less persuasion. Hands move with a speed acquired in honest ways. The rhythm of many days, teaching muscle and bone that nothing is improved by hurry and everything is improved by care. The day lays out its quiet tasks, the way a mother lays out clothes for a child. Choosing for weather, choosing for fit, choosing for comfort, never for praise. Some of the work is the same. Wood, water, animals, bread. Some is a little different. A line to mend in the fence where a drift leaned. A patch to fit at the elbow because the elbow will be asked for more reaching soon. A sharping of a hoe. because hope shapes tools as well as plans. A check of seed in its dry clay jar. Weight in the hand. Soft rattling. The serious calculation of enough. There are more birds now. Not many and not noisy, but more. A lark tries a phrase and stops, then tries again and finds it has remembered more than it knew. Rooks fuss themselves into committees among the bare crowns of trees, as if there were forms to fill and petitions to phrase. Children run messages along the lane and return with red cheeks and the right information. They bring also news no one requested. The crease the river has cut along its edge where water thinks about being water again. The single green blade of something. Unnamed and brave. Pushing through the thawed spoonful near a south stone. The place where the fox's pattern broke, and he went elsewhere for reasons best known to him. Tools wake in their own ways. The spade, cleaned and hung in autumn with a dignity nearly ecclesiastical, is lifted down and admired for not having rusted. The rake's tines, checked with the judgment of fingertips, are declared sound. A bucket is re-hooped with the smith's help, and the sound of hoop onto stave rings like a good sentence finished. The wheelbarrow's wobble is negotiated into obedience with a wedge and a wink. None of it rushes spring, all of it befriends it in advance. There will still be hard nights. There are always hard nights left in a season that owes the land its arithmetic. A frost will take back what a day's thaw loaned. A wind will throw a handful of sharp snow across the fields to remind everyone of the old terms. The house and the people inside it will not be caught surprised. The ember will be taller under its ash. The cloaks will be within reach. The buckets will be covered. The animal stalls will be overlaid with straw thick as a blessing. The body that learned how to breathe for winter will breathe again for winter and find that the lungs are pleased to show they remember. The morning after such a night will have that particular peace that follows any small proof that care works. If there is a single lesson late winter wishes to write where it will be read, it is the lesson of arrangements. The way lives agree with weather. The way neighbors agree with doors. The way hands agree with work. The way ember agrees with ash. Things are not conquered here. They are conversed with. Cold is not beaten. It is met. Darkness is not denied. It is accompanied. Hunger is not mocked. It is negotiated with pots and patience. Tiredness is not resented. It is answered with sleep. Fear is not forbidden. It is looked in the face and given something to do. Carry wood, mend a sock, stand watch, mind the ember. Toward evening, on a day that has breathed longer than its sister yesterday, a sound finds its way across the distance that separates the village from the far hill. It is not startling, only new for this month. Water traveling under stone without hiding itself. The river has loosened a seam. It will tighten again before it commits. But even such a rumor persuades someone to step toward the bridge and lean over the low wall. The ice, which has been a thought for so long, becomes a thing again, gray and complicated. And then, at the edge near the south bank, you can see where it has filed itself thinner and thinner, and then stopped being ice at all. A trickle, no more, runs. No one cheers. A person simply stands there long enough to let the trickle settle into memory and become part of everything else the village is ready to remember. Supper that night tastes faintly of victory even though nothing was fought. A scrap of green is shaved into it. Onion tops from a pot kept against the inside sill where a little warmth convinced them to be bolder than winter usually allows. The smallest child notices and smiles with his mouth full. The eldest notices and pretends not to make a fuss, but sets his spoon down for a moment longer than it takes to swallow, and then resumes with the serene air of one who has seen many such first greens, and each time has been privately grateful beyond telling. As night puts its careful hand on the roof, the house arranges itself again into the shape that holds sleep best. Ember bedded, kettle near, boots face to warmth, stone wrapped, blankets leveled, cloaks pledged. Hens above find the tight line of comfort on their perch and run their beaks under wing. The dog circles once, twice, and then lies exactly where he lay last night, because last night proved that Spot knows how to keep a promise. The wind arrives late and only to look in, and then it keeps walking the way travelers do when they understand that some doors are closed, not against them, but for the safety of what the door has chosen to love. What remains to be said belongs to winter itself, and winter does not talk much. It prefers to demonstrate. It shows how much warmth can be made from small continuances. A few coals, a bit of birch, a breath that remembers it is useful. It shows how hunger does not rule if stew and bread conspire against it courteously. It shows how fear loses its sharpness if it must count spoons and fold blankets and carry water and check the latch. It shows how community is not a parade, but a handful of doors that open quickly at a knock, and a handful of knocks offered without waiting to be asked. It shows how faith is less a proclamation than a candle that is lit precisely, trimmed exactly, and moved carefully from hand to hand through rooms that have learned what light is for. Sleep now in that knowledge. Sleep and know the ember will keep its quiet vow under ash, the kettle its small station, the roof its posture, the door its patient latch. Sleep and know the road will remember the shape of feet in the morning, even if the night tries a light snow. Sleep and know the animals breathe your breath back to you in larger measures and return warmth for warmth without calculation. Sleep and know the river is deciding slowly and correctly, and you need not advise it. Sleep and know that somewhere in the dark, another house is doing exactly as yours is doing, tending, mending, banking, sharing, and that the village sleeps as a single calm creature with many warm rooms. And when morning returns, and it will, in that sideways winter way, brightening the edges before it speaks, you will hear again the soft scrape at the hearth. You will smell again the kindness of smoke and honey. You will feel again the steady weight of a bowl in your hands, and the lighter weight of worry stepping off your shoulders and going somewhere sensible to work. You will set one foot, then the other, into boots that have learned your shape, lift the latch that has learned your touch, and step into a yard that has learned your pace. The day will meet you with its hand out, the same hand it offered yesterday, the same it will offer tomorrow. And inside that hand will be what late winter gives to those who kept it company. Not a prize, not a surprise, only the durable ease of life lived slowly and well. So the story finishes as winter finishes, without flourish, without trumpet, without anything breaking that cannot be mended, or freezing that cannot be warmed, or darkening that cannot be lit. The village goes on. The hearth goes on. The ember opens its eye. Your breath finds its patient measure. Outside, along the hedges, the snow continues to write its small script. Inside, upon the straw, the house continues to read. And you, wrapped in the long, sure silence that such reading produces, may drift and rest, and rest and drift, until the first pale seam of dawn stitches itself to the rim of the world and asks, as it has always asked, the gentlest question a day can ask. Shall we begin again?